Okay, so welcome. I'm happy to be here again talking to you about my book. Daisha always assures me that at some point somebody wants to know about how the book got written, et cetera, et cetera. But many of you have heard this before, and I'll rush through it really quickly and then get on to the main event, which is to talk about the incredible and amazing Albert and Adele Herter and what they did for us in Santa Barbara. I was born in Holland, so this is the about the author part. And I was born in The Hague. This painting of it in 1553 shows you how long it's been around. It was quite built up at that time. And if you look, I'll take my cursor, and Betsy showed me how to do this, and I've forgotten, of course. But there in those woods is, in the 1800s, there was a whole row of houses, and that's where I was born. Now in Holland, every single family, or at least they used to, have these postcards. You go to the studio, you dress up in traditional Dutch costume, and you get your picture taken. Now this is my mother and her brother over here on the right. In the center is my great-grandfather, and over here is my father. Every household in Holland has one of these, I guarantee you. Of course, my brother and I on the left had to get into Dutch costume as well. In 1954, my parents, my father, who was an aeronautical engineer, was recruited by Lockheed to come to California and work. And so we gave up our Dutch costumes, and we gave up, oh, this was terrible. We had to give up Sinterklaas. And Sinterklaas came on December 5th. There was a whole tradition with it. Christmas was basically a religious and family holiday. This is my father with Sinterklaas. But we were able to replace it with cowboy costumes and Santa Claus. I'm going to fast forward. I grew up in Granada Hills, went to Granada Hills High School, went to UCSB, graduated, got a teaching credential, worked for 30 years teaching English and history, primarily to 8th graders. And then when I retired, I was able to finally pursue an interest of mine, which was local history. And I had taught English and American studies, so what better way to blend my two disciplines than to start writing about local history. Now, some of my work has endured in the Noticias, which were in permanent editions, and then I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be hired by the Community Arts Music Association to research and write their 100th birthday history. And this was an early work that is still available. This one in the middle, my Santa Barbara scrapbook, is an early work that is available at the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. Also, it was co-edited by me and Michael Redman. It's basically the memoir of Elizabeth Eaton Burton. And Elizabeth Eaton Burton had lived in Santa Barbara from 1886 until 1910. And the book is about her art, but more so, it's about what Santa Barbara was like then. And she's a very engaging writer. For the Montecito Journal, I have written over probably 400 articles. And a couple of years ago, I realized that most of those articles and all of that work was ending up here. So I decided that it was time to put it into a more permanent, or at least some of it into a more permanent form. And so the way it was, Santa Barbara Comes of Age was born. And I love this photograph because it shows Santa Barbara back in 1886 when Elizabeth Eaton Burton first got there. It was there were dirt roads, mule trams, wooden sidewalks, hitching posts, brick buildings with false fronts. By 1930, we were a completely different town. And that transition is the period of time that I like to write about because there's lots of exciting things happening. Now, really quickly, the book itself is broken into 4 sections. Rolling Out the Red Carpet is about various groups and people that visited Santa Barbara and for whom we rolled out the red carpet. besides Buffalo Bill entertaining us, we entertained Theodore Roosevelt and William McKinley. We also entertained for 5 days the Great White Fleet that was on a round the world voyage. It was all of these festivities were well reported in the morning press and the daily news, and there were lots of really interesting things that happened. The second section is called Into the Hills. It's really about the front country trails and the back country trails in Santa Barbara. Each canyon has its own little story and the hiking and what was going on at the time. Some very interesting things that those of you who especially love to hike in the hills, this might really appeal to you. The Wheeled Revolution is essentially about the advent of the automobile in Santa Barbara and how it made such amazing changes in the way we lived, like it did nationally and everywhere else in the world. The very early days of the automobile in Santa Barbara had a lot of humor to them as we tried to figure out what to do with this new form of transportation and how to solve all the problems that it created. The Sunset magazine here that you see has a pretty vivid visual description of what some of those problems might be. The fourth section was, I chose 5 different people who had made a difference to the development of Santa Barbara. Alexander Harmer was an artist who basically preserved all the stories of the old Spanish days by painting them. Roland Sauter, we walk or drive by his work every single day. Think Santa Barbara High School, think City Hall, and the Cabrillo Pavilion, among many, many other projects. The visual landscape of Santa Barbara, he was a real contributor to that. Dr. Charles Caldwell Park and his wife Helen preserved the tales of old California through listening to the stories told by his Montecito neighbors that you see pictured here and writing about them. And Helen was very involved with Neighborhood House. She also was the founder of the Montecito Club that several of my friends were members of. Dr. Jane Edna Spalding became the first superintendent of Cottage Hospital. It was thanks to her that Cottage Hospital survived those early years, and her story of becoming a doctor is really one that is incredibly inspiring and interesting. But the people I've chose to talk about today and that I have not talked about are Albert and Adele Herter. They were artists, and they left a lasting impression on the cultural life of Santa Barbara. They were born into wealthy East Coast families. Adele's father was a New York banker, and Albert's father was a man named Christian Herter, who together with his half-brother Gustav learned the cabinetry trade from their father in Germany, who was also a Christian Herter. And the brothers then came to America around 1848 and soon had a thriving furniture making and interior decorating company, which was favored by the captains of industry and finance of the Gilded Age. Their work, as you can see, featured lavish carvings, exquisite inlay work, and it made them very, very wealthy. So wealthy that Albert was able to indulge their son Albert was able to indulge himself in absolutely everything he wanted. And Albert was a gifted artist. And when he was studying in Paris, that's when he met Adele. The two fell in love, returned to New York in 1893 to get married, gave up the idea of a reception, but raced off to Chicago, where Albert had some work in the Chicago World's Fair of that year, and he was the youngest artist ever to be exhibited in a World's Fair at the time. And then they raced off to San Francisco, caught a steamer for Japan, where they would immerse themselves into the culture. The art of Japan was becoming very, very popular in the United States at this time, and many artists were infusing their work with Japanese styles and features. The Herters immersed themselves in the culture and produced a vast amount of work while they were there on their honeymoon. Albert had first visited Japan when he was 16 years old on a world tour, and he had found Japan to be a Garden of Eden. He said at one time that it was the most beautiful place in the world. Albert and Adele, after their honeymoon, returned to Paris, but then several years later returned to Japan for another 2 years, where they again immersed themselves in the culture and the work. In a 1904 interview, Albert Herter said, "I wore the Japanese costume entirely while in country and still find time to don their dress very often in my Paris studio. Notice, however, the development of his style and expertise between the 1889 image on the left and the 1893 image on the right. What I'm most impressed with is the fact that on the image on the left, the woman does not really look Japanese, of Japanese descent. And the flowing of her robes and the whole image is just not nearly as romantic and loose and lovely as the image on the right, where he has really captured the ethnicity of the Japanese woman that he's painting. Later, as Japanese style continued to increase in popularity, Albert often posed models in Japanese dress, like he did this woman. So how'd they get to Santa Barbara? Well, they got to Santa Barbara because Albert's mother, Mary Miles Herter, who was bought an entire block in Santa Barbara and built her estate. This estate was a Mediterranean style house. It had a red tile roof. It had 2 open loggias. They're not open in this photograph, but they had 2 open loggias on the top. It was built in a U shape with a patio in the U and an arcade all around. She planted the entire block as a garden with lavish plantings. Mary Miles Herter had been born into a very wealthy Eastern family whose roots dated back to colonial times. She studied art and she studied music in both Paris and Germany. And when she returned to the United States, she married Christian Herter of Herter Brothers design firm. She was a devotee of aestheticism, which was an art movement that believed that beauty had value all on its own and that art didn't need to have a deeper meaning to be valuable or significant. What you see in this photograph is Mary Herter posing in her home in Santa Barbara. The chair is a Herter Brothers chair, and the painting behind her is of her and was created by her husband, Christian Herter. She was a widow by the time she got to Santa Barbara and had been for many years. Mary believed in promoting great music, and she became a generous benefactor of Cesar Lamonaco's municipal band, which had come to Santa Barbara in 1909. She gave many benefit performances for the band in her beautiful estate to support it, and she was also a generous benefactor of Neighborhood House, and the children always serenaded her at Christmas time. She made sure that Lamonaco's band played concerts there every Sunday for their edification. Mary also led the charge to protest against advertising on the new Potter Theater's curtain in 1906. She felt the advertisements had cheapened the theater, and she helped gather over 100 signatures of prominent Santa Barbarans who all pledged that they would never set foot in any store or business that advertised on this curtain. Mary was, in 1906, the side streets of Santa Barbara were still dirt, and the loggia, which if you can see with my cursor here, the loggia was still open. There was no window glass in there. That didn't happen until later. And these 2 lions were sculpted by Mary. She had become quite a competent sculptress, but when she married Christian Herter, she basically gave it up. Mary was extremely proud of her two sons. The oldest, named Christian, became a doctor and a scientist and contributed many things to his field. And Albert, by this time in 1906 or 1907, was quite a renowned artist already. And his commission for the Ladies' Home Journal cover was talked about in our own morning press. Herter Brothers design firm went out of business in 1906, and in 1908, Albert and Adele returned to New York and opened in Mary's former home on Madison Avenue another Herter business called the Herter Looms Interior Decorators. It featured making tapestries and textiles, and hired a whole stable full of artists to do the designing. In 1893, for a wedding present, Mary Herter had given Albert and Adele 70 acres of land in East Hampton in New York. And in 1898-99, the Herters returned for a while to the United States and had this home built. It was called Pré Choisy, otherwise known as the Creeks, which is much easier to pronounce. So that's the last time I'll try the other one. However, the house was infused with colors. Take a look at the green roof. This is actually a copper roof that has a green patina on it. They intended that to be there so that it would blend in with the Atlantic Ocean and the colors of the landscape. But also they put orange and blues and greens and pinks. They were just everywhere there was color. This is actually a lantern slide from the Library of Congress, where there are many, many slides of this estate, which was quite grand. They also built 2 studios, one for Adele and one for Albert. Inside, the Creeks was an architectural canvas for the Herters. They decorated with murals, they decorated with tapestries, and their own designed furniture. When Mary died in 1913, Albert inherited the house, and he decided he was going to turn it into a hotel, an exclusive hotel. And he called it El Mirasol, meaning the sunflower. He envisioned a cottage hotel, which you see here. The cottages were of 2 types. They were either 5 rooms with 3 bathrooms, or they were 4 rooms with 2 bathrooms. They appealed to, it was so exclusive that the guests had to be invited, and it appealed to the rich and famous of the Gilded Age who would spend a month or 2 here. Early on, El Mirasol, the client list looked like a page taken from the Herter Brothers client list. The Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Crockers, the Rockefellers, the Guggenheims, and Armours all added their names to the guest book. In later years, Charles Lindbergh stayed here, as did Herman Walk and Cary Grant. John D Rockefeller favored this little cottage on the corner of Mitchell Terrain and Garden Street, where he sat on his veranda and was said to toss shiny dimes to the children of the neighborhood. I'm sure he was quite popular. The grounds were meticulously maintained, and the postcard that you're looking at shows one of those cottages. Albert and Adele started living part of the year in Santa Barbara. This photograph of Albert on the left was taken by Carolyn and Edmund Gledhill and where he is standing in the courtyard of his exclusive hotel. The brochure on the right promised the guests that they would be met at the train station, where many would arrive by private rail car, in fact, brought their own servants. It also promised quiet service and that there was no need for tipping. Chinese houseboys wore blue silk mandarin coats in the daytime and bright orange jackets by night, and this harmonized with the colors of the hotel. The floors were blue and orange tiles, and even the fountain pool in the courtyard had been painted blue to highlight the goldfish that were swimming in it. Everywhere there was color. Albert and Adele's decorative murals graced the walls of the hotel. There were 84 employees for about 44 guests. Adele's cactus mural was painted for the drawing room, and it was painted on silver foil that she had taken from Chinese tea packets, meticulously ironed and affixed to the wall. She then painted the succulents and cactus, and when Frank Lloyd Wright came to town, he saw her mural and said it was the most beautiful wall covering in the entire world. Years later, Amy DuPont asked Adele to reprise this mural in her home, Casa del Sueño in Montecito. And I was lucky enough, I think it was about 4 years ago now, to see it between owners. And this was amazing to me because I'd only seen the black and white photograph, and you really can't get a sense of it. But you can see the silver packets or the silver squares that are on the wall, and then of course the painting over it in the wonderful colors that she used. Here's another image of a section of that wall. House Beautiful wrote about it, the Herters also provided the lamp fixtures and the furniture. Notice that this is no longer Gilded Age furniture. It's not heavily ornamented or heavily carved. It is much simpler, and yet it has a very sleek style. Adele became known mostly for her floral still lifes, which you see on the right, and her portraits and her wall decoration. This is a portrait of Mrs. John D Rockefeller Jr. Obviously, the painting would be in color. This is just a black and white reproduction of it. Albert became known for his portraiture also, monumental mural painting, extravagant theater productions, and his work for the war effort during World War I and for the Community Arts Association, which I'll talk about in a bit. He was also an illustrator, and many books and magazines carried his work. And once they moved to California, he established a branch of Herter looms in San Francisco. And there he created mural paintings for the St. Francis Hotel there. This was a series that was entitled The Pageant of the Nations. And we have a postcard of this, and this one that I chose was Persia. And it's one of the 7 famous mural paintings that he created for this space. And this is the space, the cafe at the Hotel St. Francis, with Herter's murals on the wall. State houses, public libraries, colleges, any kind of public building, many of them on the East Coast have murals by Albert Herter. This particular one hangs in the Supreme Court hearing room of the state of Wisconsin, and it depicts the signing of the the Magna Carta, another important document listing our rights and advancing the rights of the common man, even though it was the knights that insisted that the king sign it. In California, a little closer to home, in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Public Library hired Herter to do a series of paintings for the history of California. And when it came to this particular panel, which was a fiesta at the Mission, Herter chose Santa Barbara's Mission for his model. At the unveiling, a woman came up to Herter and said, Mr. Herter, those are Plains Indians. They are not California Indians. And he looked at her and he said, Madam, those are visiting Indians. And he sort of got out of it, but he obviously had not really researched it too well. Even closer to home in Santa Barbara, Herter offered and was busy working on 8 to 10 paintings on the history of writing. Unfortunately, it was later in his life and he only managed to complete 2 of them. This one, the Egyptian hieroglyph, hangs in our central library, as does this one, which I only have a black and white copy of the Gutenberg Bible. They hang in that central room. They're beautiful and they are in really good shape, at least from a distance. Herter's work has been compared by some people to Maxfield Parrish and N.C. Wyeth, and I can certainly see N.C. Wyeth in his illustrative work. But I think that there's also an element of pre-Raphaelite in him and that he hung on to for much longer than the pre-Raphaelite, never mind, movement. Anyway, so I love this picture of it's black and white. I would love to see it in color. It's called The Mirror, or The Round Mirror. And I love the way the woman is looking at it. She's definitely entranced by herself. And even the detail, if you look over here to her, your left, her right, you'll see this overflowing jewel box and this beautiful draping of the clothing. To get a sense of the colors that must have been in here, take a look at this painting of his called Woman with Red Hair. But one of my favorite pre-Raphaelites was John William Waterhouse, who did the Lady of Shalott, and I think you can see sort of the resemblance. During World War I, Albert Herter donated his skills to making posters for various organizations for the war effort. One of them was for the YMCA, which was setting up canteens all throughout Europe for the American troops, and obviously the Red Cross. Adele, meanwhile, worked in New York, enlisting the girls of New York for comrade rallies, parties, and service. I think this was sort of an early USO effort. In 1921, Frederick Forrest Peabody and his wife, Kathleen Burke Peabody, you probably know them for 2 reasons. One, that Peabody Stadium, Santa Barbara High School, he had donated the money to build that, which was just recently replaced. And also because he was associated with, made most of his money through Arrow shirts. Both of them were very much involved with scouting, and the scouting movement was just starting in the United States. And Peabody wanted to send the founder, the British founder, Colonel Sir Baden-Powell, a portrait of an American Boy Scout. And so the search was on. Herter was hired to do the painting, and Andrew Cobb Blake, only one of 3 Eagle Scouts at the time, was selected to represent the typical Boy Scout. This particular image became the symbol for scouting all over the world. As an illustrator, he illustrated many books. The one on the left is King Arthur being besieged by some sort of monsters in Tales of the Enchanted Isles. And the one on the right, every single chapter starts this way with some sort of almost whimsical opening. And this is a story of the Creoles in Louisiana. The Herters had 3 children. You see Adele with Lydia on the lower right in the circle picture. Christian and Everett Herter are brothers sitting back to back reading books, and the portrait on the right is one that Adele created of her son Everett. Now, Christian Herter became Christian Herter became governor of Massachusetts and Secretary of State under Dwight D. Eisenhower, Everett Herter followed his parents into the art world. During World War I, he volunteered for the camouflage troops and was killed at Chateau Thierry on June 13th, 1918. This was a great tragedy, obviously, for the whole community. In 1923, Herter was hired by the French government through a series of connections to create a monumental mural dedicated to and honoring the sacrifices made by the French troops who departed from Gare de l'Est in 1914 and throughout the war. It was a monumental work. He struggled with it and how to get it to make it work and how to make it happen. Eventually, after getting the smaller version and plan made, he was given a room in the Palace of Versailles to complete the mural because it was so incredibly large. He also used some of his family to pose as models for some of the images. At the dedication ceremony, if you look here, you'll see a mass of people on top of a train. These are all World War I vets. The train had ceremoniously backed into the station from which these young men had left years earlier to go fight the battles on the battlefield. And Chateau Thierry, there were so many deaths. It was a great tragedy. In fact, the whole war was, of course. At this ceremony, the Herter mural was unveiled, and Albert Herter was given by Marshal Joffre, I don't know how to pronounce his name, pardon me, gave him the French Medal of Honor. That mural is there today. It was taken down, put back up, taken down, put back up, but it's there today. It's been restored. And it is really quite something. In some ways, I consider it his greatest work because the emotion is so honorable in it. A fellow artist wrote this to him, and I think you can see this if you listen to what he had to say when he saw it at Versailles. You have done a splendid thing, full of tenderness and sensitivity, beauty and noble emotion. A distinguished work of art, which will appeal to the French above all others. It is very touching and tragic in its naturalness, without false gestures or exaggerations. It finds the depths and wrings the heart with the pity of it. This is where Herter placed his family, and it's really pretty interesting when you know what you're looking at. This is Albert Herter. He's holding his heart and a bunch of flowers. This is Everett Herter's widow, Alice Keck Herter, Bridge. And look where she's looking into, watch her direction of her eye. This is a shadowy figure, is Everett Herter. This young man who never got to meet his father is Everett Herter Jr. And Carolyn married after Everett died, his friend and other camouflager, a man named Dwight Bridge, who became quite a famous artist. And they had 2 children, and these are their 2 children. So the whole thing is incorporated into this monumental canvas and is there for perpetuity. Okay, let's go back to Santa Barbara, get out of France. After World War I and the Spanish flu, Santa Barbara developed the Community Arts Association. There was a whole series of steps and events and things just kind of bubbled over. And out of all of these things that started happening right about 1919 until 1918 actually, to 1919, 1920, came an organization called the Community Arts Association. Eventually, by 1921, it would have a drama branch, an orchestra or music branch. It would have a School of the Arts, a plants and planting branch, and it would take care of the community Christmas celebration. If you look down to the middle, you see that on that board is Mrs. Albert Herter. The Herters were incredibly involved with this organization. The purpose of the organization, by the way, was to involve your average person, every person that could possibly want to enlighten and enrich their lives in art, music, drama, and other artistic things. The first community Christmas tree was actually in 1914. It was a living Christmas tree on the grounds of the county courthouse. World War I broke out in Europe. The Christmas tree idea was abandoned for a while. And then in 1920, Pearl Chase brought it back. And who did she put in charge? But Albert and Adele Herter. This is not that tree. I don't think that tree was further over, and it was a cypress. They were in charge of the tree decorations. They actually made them themselves. They were in charge of designing the costumes. They were in charge of creating a tableau. They were in charge of a pageant, and in which, of course, Albert performed. And they, unfortunately, it was all supposed to be outdoors, and of course it rained. And they had to run into the recreation center, which Margaret Baylor was in charge of and a founder of. But nevertheless, that was the beginning. 1920, Albert and Adele Herter started, along with Pearl Chase, the tradition of the community Christmas tree. It became known as the Tree of Light, and it's still with us today. It's moved after the earthquake. The courthouse obviously was badly damaged. They moved the Christmas tree. They didn't move the tree. They designated a tree on the old Arlington, which had also fallen down, but there was a pine tree there, and they designated that as the Tree of Light. And then when the Arlington Theater was being built, then in 1928 or 29, they went to the Norfolk Island pine on the corner of Chapala and State Street. And what you're seeing here is that Tree of Light. That tree is still the Tree of Light, and next to it here, this building is now gone. This is the old YMCA building, and it's now the parking lot of Ralph's. Okay, Adele Herter, a woman named Clara Hinton Gould, and a man named Roger Clairbois decided that one of the things that Santa Barbara needed in 1921 was a community orchestra, one that was made up of community members. Very quickly, the concept and idea got thrown into the Community Arts Association. And so what you're seeing here is the notes from the very first meeting in March of 1921 at Albert Herter's house on Valerio Street. And this is the foundation of the Community Arts Music Committee. And what comes down to us today, it's one piece of what comes down to us today as the Community Arts Music Association. That's all that's left of the Community Arts Association in this town. So Adele designed the robes. They were purple. Roger Clairbois was in charge of conducting, obviously, and the curtains that you see behind him are the curtains that were made at Herter Looms. It lasted for 2 or 3 years. It was funded by Clara Hinton Gould. I think I already said that. And he played every Sunday at the Recreation Center. This is the Recreation Center stage that you're seeing, which you should be able to recognize because it looks pretty much the same. Also, Albert, what got involved with the School of the Arts, and this was, they had everything there at first, all kinds of arts, even languages, and crafts, architecture, drama, garden design, etc., dance. So the School of the Arts was where Albert really made his impact. He taught a lot of the students, and some of them became his assistants when he had commissions to do murals elsewhere. He was quite flamboyant. He often showed up in a red fox coat to teach his classes in. Albert also got involved with the drama branch, which was sort of a given. He produced several extravaganzas. All of them were benefits to benefit and support the Community Arts Association. This is one of the sets that he designed. And on the left, Albert loved to get dressed up. He really, really liked donning costumes because he painted them so meticulously. On the left, he's playing the role of the Emperor Justinian. On the right, he is the king from The Gift of Eternal Life. On the left, you see him in a self-portrait where he has dressed himself up as Hamlet. Now, what you're seeing on the right is just one page of 4 from a program for the temple. This included some really well-known names. In fact, if you look here, the fan bearer, I think you can see my little cursor coming across, that's Angelica Bryce. Angelica Bryce, if you know who the architect Mark Appleton is, that was his grandmother. Also, you can see that Albert down here in the production staff, Albert Herter was a co-director with Nina Moyes, who later had a career in Hollywood. And below that, the technical director and stage manager was David Imboden. And David became a pretty famous silent movie star. And the other thing to notice is how many people are involved in these things. He brought in everybody that he possibly could in town. And Albert, of course, played the role of Dionysus in that particular production. So there you see him. He'd been doing this for many years. This is 1908 or 9, I guess. There's Albert as Dionysus with his bacchantes, which were then incorporated into The Gift of Eternal Life, which was Herter's last extravaganza, which played in 1929 at the New Libero Theater. In fact, the Herters had been involved in the construction of the theater. They had been on committees that went back to New York to study and learn and take notes on what was happening in New York so they could bring that information back to George Washington Smith, who had so many change orders that had to have been head spinning. Anyway, that was his very, very last major production in Santa Barbara because it was 1929. But we'll get to that in a minute. This one featured Ruth St. Denis, very famous dancer in the United States with, of course, Albert. And then that's David Imboden with Ruth St. Denis. It was a very sumptuous and interesting production and very popular. But like I said, it was 1929. For the next 11 to 12 years, the United States would be dealing with a depression, and then following that, a war. And things were completely changed by the time all of that was over. Plus, Adele and Albert, seen here sitting at the Creeks, have been aging. In 1946, Adele died. Albert moved back to Santa Barbara, took a cottage at El Mirasol, which was still in existence then, and he passed in 1950. The Tree of Light, the Community Arts Music Association, the 2 murals on the history of writing, and a host of paintings in private collection are just a few of the many gifts they bequeathed to Santa Barbara. They were truly an incredible influence, and their story and others can be found in my book.